So we'll start with Kushal sir's talk. Again, I think he doesn't need any introduction. Everybody is well aware of him. So I think without wasting any time, let's hand over the stage to sir, who will be covering cervical lymph node FNAC.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I have my slides? I'm a pathologist and I do mostly lymph nodes and bone marrows. Lymph node FNACs are a small part, and since I work in Tata Memorial Hospital, it will be mostly lymphomas. Obviously some metastatic carcinomas, occasional granulomas. So I'll share with you whatever is my experience in lymph nodes flow, lymph nodes mainly, and then how do you use lymph nodes in other aspiration in other ancillary techniques. What are the indications? You don't have that other thing. Call the mic. This is mic, huh? I have to use this. Okay. In FNAC for the nodes, any lump, palpable lump, we put a needle, and it's the easiest and the best technique. Turnaround time is very less, and we are trained to look at morphology. So any palpable lump, put a needle. Mostly cervical nodes, very common. Tuberculosis is very common. Viral infections are very common. Just to show you some pictures of normal, how a normal lymph node FNA look like. This is a low power view. I'm sure many of you will be more experienced than me in lymph node in aspiration cytology, but my take when I look at lymph node, I look at the polymorphous sizes, small, large and intermediate size. I think I'm dealing with a reactive node, unlikely to be a lymphoma. If I find some eosinophils coming up and RS-like cells, possibly Hodgkin's. Otherwise, if the node shows small, large, intermediate, immunoblast, mixed, nucleolated cells, mononuclear, so most likely I'm dealing with a reactive node. But it can still be a lymphoma, but most likely a reactive node. Mostly lymphomas will give you a monomorphic population of tumor cells, monomorphic. Whether they are small, whether they are large, whether they are cleaved, whether they are vacuolated, whether they are blastic. They'll be all very similar looking. As you look at the lymph node histology, we have different parts of lymph node. We have T zone and a B zone. B zone is got germinal centers. Secondary follicles has germinal center, mantle, marginal zone. Germinal centers have 3 to 4 types of cells: centrocytes, centroblasts, T helper cells, follicular dendritic cells. Marginal zone cells have larger size. Mantle cells have small cleaved cells. So if you look at the lymph node histology, there are lymphocytes are many type, many morphology. 6, 7 types: centrocytes, centroblasts, immunoblasts, plasma cells, monocytoid B cells. So similarly, in FNAC, you'll get all these 4, 5, 6 type of lymphoid cells. So if you find 4, 5, 6 types of lymphoid cells, most likely we're dealing with, a normal reactive node. Or could be some other infective or some other cause, non-neoplastic cause. Not non-hematolymphoid cause, I'll say. So like this, tangible body macrophages, large cells, small, intermediate size cells, immunoblast-like cells. PAP is another stain. The Giemsa is the best stain. Romanowski, any Romanowski stain is the best stain to study hematolymphoid tissue. So Jenner Giemsa, May Grunwald Giemsa, plain Giemsa, Wright, Leishman, whichever you are comfortable with. Field stain, whichever you are comfortable with. Giemsa is the best stains to study. CSF, best stains to study lymphoid lesions, bone marrows and the lymphoid lesions. I do not have experience on HND and FNACs, we don't do. Now, obviously, as I told you, this is a very, cells look small, large, intermediate, very, very large, and tangible body macrophages, histiocytes, this is reactive, this is more monomorphic though, there are a few large cells, there are some eosinophil polymorphs, this could be a neoplastic, it is a more mixture, so T cell lymphomas can come like this, Hodgkin's can come like this. Now the commonest we see in lymph nodes is granulomas. Now next few slides have been given to me by Dr. Kane's resident, what's his name? Nikita. So thanks to Nikita. Nikita is not here today. These are the granulomas. I'm sure all of us, I don't have to dwell on this. Then tumors are 2 types. One could be a metastatic or could be primarily lymphoidal tumors or the lymphomas. Metastatic deposits, yeah, Kane and Nikita. These are like classical carcinomas, adenocarcinomas. You can have adenocarcinomas in lymph nodes. And you can do immunohistochemistry or immunocytochemistry to look for a possible primary. Now CK7, 20, TTF1 or some GI markers you can do to look at possible primary sites even on the FNACs, though it's more standardized, more easy on the histopathology because of automation and more regularly used. Few centers do it on cytology also. I think Dr. Kane does it. And sometimes you have poorly differentiated adenocarcinomas. And then you have classical keratinizing cells, like this keratinizing squamous cell carcinoma. These are commonest metastatic carcinoma we see in the head and neck tumors, very common, and cervical nodes, it's very, very common. Keratinizing squamous carcinomas. So you can get pearls like this, or you can get keratinized cells, or you can get some poorly differentiated carcinoma cells also. This dark black, jet black nucleus, necrotic background. And sometimes you have basaloid variant of squamous carcinoma. This again, Dr. Kane's resident has given me the slide. Rarely you get sarcomatoid carcinomas, or you can get sarcomas going to lymph nodes. So rarely you get. So you have to have history, otherwise difficult to call it carcinoma. It could be a sarcomatoid carcinoma, or it could be a sarcoma. So lymph node can have obviously all these malignant tumors, germ cell, carcinomas, melanomas going to lymph nodes. Now we go to lymphomas in FNACs. Now it's my slides. So lymphoma diagnosis, the gold standard is biopsy. And lymph node aspiration is not the modality to do diagnosis, but we do FNACs because the patient comes with a mass, and most of us we do FNAC first, thinking it could be tuberculosis. But if we have a suspicion of lymphoma, we should not do FNAC, unless until you are doing FNAC for flow and FNAC for molecular. FNAC becomes a tool of collecting tissue to send it to the different laboratories. But if you're suspecting lymphoma, best is to do histopath, complete node biopsy, largest node, whole node biopsy, not a small node excision, incision, no, full node biopsy, and the largest palpable node should be removed by a surgeon, not a resident, because many times you get crushed lymph node tissue also. So it's a specialized. So you have to see the paraffin embedded HND section. This is important, and obviously you can do all ancillary techniques on the paraffin blocks. FNAC's role in lymphomas, the main role is, as I told you, you can get tissue and you can send it to molecular lab, cytogenetic lab, or a flow lab. Or if you are doing NGS, now to the NGS lab. Or you can snap freeze the tissue for further proteomic studies. And obviously you can detect the relapse. If a patient has a known case of DLBCL and patient has relapsed in the abdomen, and you cannot do a biopsy for many reasons. If you do FNAC, and pathologists can, we can see the slide, Giemsa stain, and we can fairly say, oh, this is a relapse of lymphoma. Sometimes relapse can be of different types, and relapse can be of higher grade. So that you have to keep in mind. But this is one of the indications where you can do FNAC and say consistent with relapse. You can't diagnose it only on the morphology. We can go wrong. I will see some cases. So lymphomas, can be varied types. You can have a lymphoma, small cell lymphomas. You can have Hodgkin's lymphomas, like with polymorphous background. This is a PAP. I'll show you Giemsa. Like you have RS-like cells, mononuclear. You can have binucleate, classical. Many times you don't get binucleate. You get mononuclear. But mononuclear cells can look like immunoblasts, and mononuclear cells, if you have only like these can be, can be confused with immunoblasts. Can be seen in many other B-cell lymphomas and many other T-cell lymphomas. So Hodgkin's is not the only one lymphoma where you get RS-like cells. When you have classical RS cells, which we study in the textbooks, binucleate, possibly, most likely it's Hodgkin's. Hodgkin's is diagnosed basically in biopsy, one. And in biopsy also you have to see two things. One is classical RS cells, and two is classical milieu. So if you don't see both the things, don't call it Hodgkin's. You have to take then help of IHCs, and then you have to use your experience and clinical to call it Hodgkin's. Many times we've called many cases of Hodgkin's and we've gone wrong. Hodgkin's is the most easily diagnosed and easily misdiagnosed entity. We overdiagnose many cases which are reactive, and many lymphomas which are Hodgkin's, we underdiagnose them. We call them something else. So Hodgkin one has to be very careful, and we have burnt our fingers the last few years. We realize that Hodgkin is very difficult to diagnose. And easiest to diagnose is peripheral T-cell lymphoma, because we are always careful about that, which is the most difficult. So we always give a caveat, please do T-cell receptor studies, or please do something. But in Hodgkin's, we just give one line report, Hodgkin's lymphoma. And we can be wrong 5 to 10% of times, if not more. So one has to be very careful. Common differentials of Hodgkin's in FNAC as well as in biopsy would be T-cell rich B-cell lymphoma, T-cell histocyte rich B-cell lymphoma, where you can get these tumor cells, which can look like RS cells. So these are mononuclear cells mostly, and they are neoplastic. Then second, B-cell lymphoma, which is a common differential of Hodgkin, is NLPHL. Hodgkin lymphoma is of two types, classical and NLPHL. So NLPHL can also give you mononuclear RS-like cells. These binucleate are classically seen in classical Hodgkin's. These can be seen in the variant of Hodgkin's, which is called as NLPHL. So these are two classically B-cell lymphomas which can mimic classical Hodgkin lymphoma. One is NLPHL, second is T-cell histiocyte B-cell lymphoma. Similarly, T-cell lymphomas can mimic Hodgkin's lymphoma. Peripheral T-cell lymphomas can mimic Hodgkin's, both on histology as well as on FNAC. Because peripheral T-cell lymphoma also has a polymorphous background. It has eosinophils, plasma cells. Is a polymorphous. So when you see on FNAC a polymorphous background, neutrophils, eosinophils, you think of Hodgkin's. Even peripheral T-cell lymphoma can give you the same picture. We had a lot of pink histiocytes and histiocytes, polymorphs, plasma cells, RS-like cells. Those are actually immunoblasts. So those cells are immunoblasts. Now these look like tumor. They do not look like immunoblasts. Immunoblasts are nice round centrous nucleus and very prominent central nuclei. But sometimes we can be wrong. Immunoblasts, RS-like cells can look like immunoblasts. Classically, they are very benign looking, very standard looking, but sometimes you can go wrong. So one has to be careful. So what is the point? Then the point is, which are the cells of interest? Are these tumor cells or the large ones are the tumor cells? See, this is the million-dollar question for a pathologist. When you look at T-cell lymphomas or even Hodgkin's, you have to, I will call it Hodgkin's because I think these are the tumor cells. Dr. Kane or my other colleague can say, no, this is a PTCL. I think these small cells are neoplastic and these are reactive bystanders. So that is the dilemma which a pathologist faces when you report lymphomas. So the most important thing is cells of interest. What are the cells of interest? Cells of interest can be scanty, can be large, can be many. In Hodgkin's, cells of interest are scanty. They are less than 1%. That's why they call it Hodgkin's disease. They don't call it Hodgkin's lymphoma. Now they start calling it lymphoma. Initially we used to call it Hodgkin's disease because cells of interest are very scanty, 1%, less than 1%. Now, if this is Hodgkin's, then I'll say these are RS cells. 30 positive, 15 positive, LCA negative, 20 negative, PAX5 positive, EBV, LMP1 positive. Classical. But if my colleague says, no, Sumit, these are all reactive bystanders, histiocytes, or immunoblasts, I think these small cells are bad. These ones. And I mind you, peripheral T-cell lymphomas, the background T cells look very innocuous. They look very benign. So you can go wrong. In the peripheral T-cell lymphomas, the T lymphocytes, which are neoplastic, they can look very normal, morphologically, benign. And they can have large-sized immunoblast in the background, which can look like RS cells. And they have eosinophils, plasma cells. So first differential was B-cell lymphomas, two types, NLPHL, T-cell histiocyte rich. Second common differential of Hodgkin's is PTCL, peripheral T-cell lymphoma. And a third very common differential of Hodgkin's is reactive node, which is viral infections, EBV, CMVs, HIVs. Commonly EBV. Now EBV-related adenopathy is extremely common. Mostly the child of a VIP, or doctor's son or doctor's daughter, young school-going kid has cervical node. Parents get worried. They get the biopsy done, or FNAC. You'll find bad-looking cells, RS-looking cells. So if you have those kind of cells, those are mostly immunoblasts, viral activated cells. So one has to be careful. So Hodgkin's can have all three differentials. However, in those viral infections, generally you do not see this kind of polymorphous background. But still, RS-like cells are there. So these all three are differentials of Hodgkin's. Now this is a classical case of mantle cell lymphoma. This is FNAC of a cervical node. This is a very old slide. Mantle cell lymphoma can look like CLL. See, mantle cell lymphoma on the flow or an FNAC comes differential of CLL. But mantle cell lymphoma has different morphological patterns. One is classical, called as lymphocytic type mantle cell lymphoma, means mature looking like. Then second type is blastic type mantle cell lymphomas. So this is more blastic like. So you have to know that. Blastic type can look like high grade and lymphocytic type can look like CLL. So now the lymphocytic type of mantle cell lymphoma cannot be easily differentiated from CLL. We need to do immunohistochemistry or flow cytometry. Mantle cell lymphoma is a very bad lymphoma. CLL is a good lymphoma. CLL is of two types, good one and bad one. The good CLL patients live for 40 years, 50 years, no problems. The bad CLL ones, they behave more like mantle cell. We'll come to that. So one has to differentiate CLL from mantle. And mantle also of two types, blastic as well as lymphocytic. Blastic has even poorer prognosis. Blastic means they are not TDT positive. They are just blastic because morphology is blastic and MIB1 is very high. The Ki67 index is more than 40%. So now if you're doing another FNAC, this is a PAP, this is GIMSA, these are all blasts. They look very small cells though. But if you look at the monomorphic population of lymphoid cells, this is slightly larger, but mostly there are all blast cells. These are also blasts. PAP is not the best strain, but if you are a keen PAP observer, maybe you can do it, but mostly GIMSA is the best. So monomorphic cells, blastic lymphoma. Burkitt lymphoma, we generally do not get many FNACs, we mostly do it in the bone marrows, but it's very classical morphology, Burkitt. Blue cytoplasm, dense blue cytoplasm, intermediate size, small to intermediate size cells, also known as non-cleaved cell lymphoma. The older classification was small non-cleaved cell, means small round cell lymphomas. So these are small round cells and they have basophilic cytoplasm and they have prominent vacuoles and many tangible body macrophages. Then you can have the small cell lymphomas which have some kind of cleaving. You see the cleaves, clefts, you see this triangular shaped cells. Many times these can be reactive. But if you are suspecting lymphoma, then there are two types of lymphoma which come to your mind. One is follicular lymphoma, grade 1, and differential is mantle cell lymphoma. Both are small cleaved cells. So small non-cleaved is Burkitt, and small cleaved cells are two, follicular and mantle. Rarely, CLL can also be small cleaved. But if you look at these cells, so you can always say this could be reactive lymph node because there are some large cells. But you have to believe me, this is a case of low-grade follicular lymphoma. Now because most cells are small cleaved, see this angulated and triangular shaped cells. So these are cleaved lymphoid cells, but we could just say this is atypical lymphoid. On FNAC we report atypical lymphoid aspirate suspect lymphoma. Advise a biopsy or flow cytometry for further characterization. Now this we suspected is a follicular lymphoma, but what do? You have to do a biopsy or you have to do a flow. And follicular lymphoma you can diagnose on flow, but for the grading of follicular lymphoma you still need a biopsy. Because grading by WHO, grade 1, 2, 3, is defined based on HND, number of centroblasts. So how FNAC helps us? The last slide is this. So what's the role of FNAC? FNAC will give you morphology, obviously, yes. You can define whether you want to go for lymphoma panels or blastic panels or leukemia panels, which panels. So it can guide you. Second, then you can start sending tissue for immunocytochemistry or flow or cytogenetics or molecular. I'll just skip these slides. Flow I'll show you later. Cytogenetics you can do on smears. You can look at fish. You can do molecular diagnostics. Now, as I told you, to give you an example, CLL. If you have a lymph node SLL, you do FNAC. You can make smears, or you can collect the tissue and send it to the molecular lab, and you can do IGVH gene mutations. Now, IGVH gene mutations is the marker to differentiate good CLL from bad CLL. The CLL which arise from the pre-germinal centers, which is more like mantle cell origin, are the bad ones. CLL which arise from the post-germinal center, which are more like marginal zone, are the good ones. So, and IGVH gene mutations is the prognostic marker. And IGVH gene mutations not many centers can do. So mostly we do surrogate markers, which is ZAP70 and CD38. These can be done by flow. CD38 can also be done by IHCs. So these are the markers for prognosis of CLL, good or the bad. Now this is Nikhil Patkar, my colleague, has given me this slide. It shows you IGVH gene mutations in a case of CLL. So it's a bad CLL. So now I'll show you the role of flow, and the next 15-20 minutes I'll talk about some examples of flow and lymph node FNACs. Flow, what is flow? I'm sure many of you know, but just briefly in half a minute, it's an instrument which you put your blood cells. It measures the properties of a cell in liquid form. So if you have tissues, you do immunohistochemistry. If you have blood or bone marrow or urine or CSF, you do flow. Both IHC and flow cytometry gives you similar information, antigen, antibody. Both tell you about immunophenotyping. So which is the lineage? Both will tell you. But flow will tell you in liquid forms. IHC will tell you in the solid tissues. So IHC you need a glass slide. Flow you need a glass tube with cells inside. So what you do, you take sample. This is a blood sample. You lyse the red cells you have white cell pellet and run the white cell pellet. And then you hit the laser with the pellet, this is the laser, cells are passing, and you get a lot of information. And if you put antibodies in the tube with the tumor cells, then you get a lot of information like this, these plots, CD8, CD4. So it will tell you that tumor cells are T cells or B cells or myeloid cells. And they're blastic or they're mature. So is it an ALL or is it a CLL or is it an AML? The flow will tell you by basically this principle. Now, as I mentioned, let's say this is a FNAC of a sample and it has 5 types of cells. These are the large cells like immunoblasts. Then there are small cells. These could be T cells, these gray color cells, and blue color cells, small cells are B cells. And now these sharp edged cells are tumor cells, and there are some degenerating cells. Now if you look at this, if you do FNAC, the cells of tumor cells are how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Out of maybe 100 cells, only 5 are tumor cells. So your cells of interest are few. Now you have to pick up these cells of interest. Even in IHC gives you an advantage that you have morphology. You know the RS cells are there. So I will look at CD30 in the RS cells. You don't look at CD30 in the plasma cells. That is a control you want in RS cells. Similarly, in flow, you can pick up these cells of interest. So if we pick up CD30 in these cells, we'll be getting wrong information. So you have to first select which are your cells of interest and then study the antigen antibody reaction. I think I'll skip. Now I'll just show you a lymphoma patient comes to our hospital, our lab, and what we do FNAC and we do a lymphoma screening tube. What we do lymphoma screening tube. We made Prashant is my colleague, he's made 15 colors lymphoma tube. In that tube, in one tube, we have 15 antibodies. 15 antibodies. So this is a lymph node aspiration. This is a normal lymph node. Again, you see the normal, large, small, cleaved, round, immunoblast, mixed cells, no eosinophils and plasma cells, very few plasma cells, maybe, mostly reactive lymph node. So what we do is we do IHC. There are 2 markers on x-axis. Generally we do 1, but here we have standardized to do 2 markers which are mutually exclusive. CD3 is a T cell, 14 is a monocytic. So no cell will be positive for both together. So we have done so that we can put more antibodies in one tube. 19 and T cell receptor gamma delta. 19 is a B cell marker, T cell receptor gamma delta is a T cell marker. So now you see how many populations? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 major populations are there. So now if I have to study, these are the gamma delta T cells. Because there are 3 positive, gamma delta from here, and 3 from here. These are CD19 positive B cells. And these are your all T cells and monocytes mixed. And these are some other cells. So briefly, it first plot tells you this, then you do another plot, you can get much more information. Like I'll show you. Similarly, you can separate 19 positive cells, and these are T cells. So red color cells are 19 positive, and the purple are the T cells. So now let's see the next tube and look at the clonality, whether the B cells are clonal or not, and what is the character of T cells. Let's see. Let's see the red cells first. Red cells are the T cells. So red cells are T cells. They are kappa, lambda. Half of them are kappa, and less than half are lambda. 2:1 ratio. Look at this 55%, and this is 43%. This looks normal B cells. Normal ratio kappa lambda is 2 or 4:1, and CD5 population in B cells is very few. And CD10, some germinal central B cells are there, and very few CD5 positive. Normally, you can have 1 to 2% CD5 positive B cells in the plasma lymph node. And if you look at CD38, these are CD38 positive B cells. These all are B cells only. I'm studying with B cells, and there are few cells which are CD38 positive. Can anybody tell me what these could be? B cells which are CD38 positive, strong 38 plasma cells. So CD38 is a good marker for plasma cells and hematopoiesis. But hematopoiesis won't be those bad strong. These are the plasma cells. So they hit the roof. So you can segregate your plasma cells and you can study them also later. And 34 is for blast. So there are no blasts. Now go to the T cells. As I mentioned, T cell you do CD8 and CD4. Don't look at kappa. These are mutually exclusive. So I'm just taking T cell now. This whole 4 plots will show you T cells. These are CD8, CD4. So again, good ratio, 2:1 maintained. This is non-specific. These are 7. CD7 positive T cells. CD5, most of them are CD5 positive. And CD38 is only very few cells. CD34 is negative. So these are polyclonal normal B and T cells. Now, how do you show clonality? To give you an example of clonality, let's say there's a case of follicular lymphoma where 90% cells or 98% cells are either polymorphs, these are neutrophils because of side scatter, and some other cells. CD19 positive cells are very few, 2%, 2.5% are CD19 positive B cells. And I did the clonality, lambda kappa, you see? It's a both, it's a polyclonal. So these are not the clonal B cells. And there are some cells here. These could be hematogones. Hematogones might not show you any light chains, or the blasts also might not show you any light chains. Now I'll show you the clonal. These are the CD19 positive B cells, and if you do kappa lambda, all of them are kappa. So this is a clonal B cell population. This is a polyclonal because it shows you kappa lambda, this shows you only kappa. Similarly, you can judge T cell lymphomas on flow by lymph node. These are the CD3 positive T cells. They are again 4 and 8 equally 2:1 ratio. And if you do this, again the lymph node is a peripheral T cell lymphoma. The CD4 and 8 double positive. Lymphocytes should be either 4 or 8. It should not be double positive or double negative. There are 83% cells are expressing 4 and 8 both. So this is again very abnormal. Neoplasm. We can do T cell receptor B beta repertoire. Prashant is doing this study with a student of mine. Let's get this. I'm asking this also. I'll give you some examples. Now you can do flow on lymph node aspirations also, and even cytology, CSF. If you have CSF and you're suspecting a lymphoma or leukemia, you can do flow. But you have to be careful. CSF has to be done within 2 to 3 hours. Otherwise, CSF will get degenerated. So you cannot send CSF from your hospital to a private lab on the way to degenerate. So you have to have, if you have to send a sample, you have to make sure, speak to the pathologist in the flow lab, I'm sending so that he should be ready. Samples degenerate in 2 hours, CSF. The peripheral blood maximum can stand in heparin for 2 to 3 days. Lymph node FNAC, if you're doing, then immediately you should put either in some media, transport media, or PMI or fetal cough syrup. Then again it can survive for a few days. So I'll just share with you 2-3 examples. Lymph node flow, lymphomas flow. So any case of lymphoma which comes to us, first we do a screening tube. So screening tube will tell us almost 95% whether there is a lymphoma or no lymphoma. 5% we can still go wrong, rare lymphomas. But 95% of lymphomas it will detect. So one tube is screening tube, which has 10 markers or 12 markers. So it's cheap. It's not cheap, but it's not 10 tubes. So one tube we do. So it will screen. And with screening, it will differentiate between CLL and other lymphomas. CLL is the commonest type of SLL is lymphomas. So it will be diagnosed by screening tube itself. And once we have screened, then we can go to the further specific tubes, whether it's a blastic lymphoma, it's a mature lymphoma, or it's a AML. Sometimes you can get myeloid sarcomas also. Then we do specific tubes. So we have T tube, B tube, we have 5 tubes for all lymphomas. And then we have these panels. So now, what are the aims of screening tube? It diagnoses common hematolymphoid neoplasms, and it also gives you a direction for further which more tubes to be done. It covers almost all neoplasms, B, T, NK plasma, myeloid, blastic, as well as mature. And turnaround time, it helps you bring down the turnaround time. Because when you come, your technologist has already put the screening tube without you seeing the morphology. So your screening tube has gone, and you have already have a fair idea. When you come after your lunch or after your other assignments, you come back and you see it looks like a blastic. Even your technologist would know this is plastic, would have put the plastic tubes. So screening panel will give you a rough idea, a very fair idea actually, where you're dealing with which type of neoplasm and how do you go forward. These are screening tube. I'll show you example. 51-year-old, tell me when do I stop now, when do I finish my time? What is it? 51-year-old female presented with, somebody has told me 5 minutes before. My time is 40 minutes, whatever. But yes, somebody has told me 5 minutes. So it's going to be very boring flow. 51-year-old female presented with right neck swelling in 2009-10 and was diagnosed lymphoma and was given chemotherapy. Now she has presented with recurrence of swelling neck. Biopsy has been done, has been called as low-grade B cell lymphoma. It was low-grade lymphoma, low-grade lymphoma. The FNC was done. This is FNC. Looks like a monomorphic small cell lymphoma. Do not know. Looks like low-grade. Doesn't look like plastic. That's all we can say. So we reported it. Morphology looks like a relapse of low-grade lymphoma. We'll do lymphoma screening tube. So we did the screening tube. I won't go into details, but they are all gamma positive, lambda negative. So it's a B cell, 20 positive. So they're all 20 positive B cells, and all of them are clonal. So it's a B cell lymphoma, 19, 20 positive, B cell lymphoma. And they were negative for 5 and 10. So if 5 is negative, it means unlikely to be CLL, unlikely to be mantle. And if it's 10 is negative, unlikely to be follicular. So you're left with very few lymphomas, mostly the marginal zone lymphomas. So this is a marginal zone lymphoma. Patient had marginal zone lymphoma a few years back. Here, in 2009, low-grade lymphoma, was given chemotherapy for that. Maybe required, maybe was not required. So patient was okay, again developed a low-grade lymphoma now. Again it's a low-grade. Sorry. I'm so sorry. So, it was low-grade lymphoma in 2009, was given chemotherapy, again low-grade lymphoma relapsed. Okay? So low-grade lymphoma, marginal zone lymphoma. It's a wastebasket, it's a diagnosis of exclusion. The common lymphomas are SLL, follicular, mantle, followed by marginal lymphoma. I think ascitic fluid, I think I'll skip this, I'll show you only one more lymphoma. Yes, I'll show you, this case is an interesting case. This will tell you the importance of lymph node FNACs and flow. 21-year-old male who has fever and cervical nodes, young male, 2 months duration, was diagnosed as T-cell lymphoma outside, referred to Tata Hospital, slides were reviewed. And outside it was called as weak CD3, LCA43 positive, given 4 cycles of CHOP, called as peripheral T-cell lymphoma, CHOP, and came to Tata Hospital with increasing size. And size was increasing during the treatment. So it means it's either the diagnosis is not correct or the disease is very bad. So big mass, no liver spleen, peripheral smear and bone marrows were normal. So only lymph node, big mass. So we got the biopsy blocks from outside. So these are the slides. We cut our sections and it shows lymphoma with some pleomorphic tumor cells. So the whole thing is lymphoma, has some weird sinusoidal pattern, but large size cells in between. So we thought it's a blastic lymphoma with pleomorphic giant cells. We did the stains. 20 was negative, very few cells, and 3 was mostly negative, but slightly more than 20. But MPO was negative and PAX5 was negative. So based on this T, B, and myeloid markers and another B marker, everything was negative. T was slightly more, but it looked maybe it's reactive or we were not sure. We did more stains, CD34 was positive. It's a blastic marker, so 34 was positive. So T marker negative, B marker negative, myeloid negative. For B we did 2 markers, PAX5 also we did. Because many times blastic B cell lymphomas can be 20 negative. So you have to do PAX5. But all T cell lymphomas, all will be CD3 positive. Almost all, I won't say all, almost all. So this is negative, these 2 are negative, so it is not B, it is not T. Unlikely to be myeloid. 34 blastic, so it's a blastic tumor. So we did more stains. MUM1 is a plasmablastic, CD2 another T cell negative, ALK1 30 negative. 7 is strongly positive. Now 7 is a T cell marker. 7 is a very specific T cell, sensitive T cell marker. But specific T cell marker is 3. 3 was negative, 7 is positive. Now 7 is sensitive but it is not specific. 7 can come positive in many AMLs also, acute myeloid leukemias also. However, here c-KIT was negative, MPO was negative, 15 was negative, 3 myeloid markers were negative, 7 positive. So we did more markers, TDT negative, 163 negative, histiocytic sarcoma, 48 double negative. So what are the positive markers? Only 7. 34, MIB1 was high. So we thought it's a blastic hematolymphoid neoplasm, possibly T cell because 7 was positive, 3 was mostly negative, the number was slightly more for 3 and 8. Bone marrow peripheral smear was normal. We did the flow, we did the patient had a big mass. We did the lymph node and did the flow. Here now lymph node gives the diagnosis with flow. FNAC. First we did AML MRD tube. Why? Because we thought 34 is positive, 7 is positive. So let's do one tube for AML. We have an AML MRD. MRD is minimal residual disease. It's also kind of, you can say, screening tube. So we did only this tube. Then after that, it was followed by another lymphoma tube. So first is AML MRD tube. We did this, and here it revealed that tumor cells express 34 and HLA-DR weekly. The red cells are the tumor cells, green are the reactive cells. So red cells are 34 positive and DR weekly positive. They also express 33. And now 33 is a myeloid marker. So now it's confusing. Now 33 is positive, which is a myeloid. 7 was T cell. 34 is a blastic. DR doesn't come in T cell classical. So are we dealing with some myeloid marker? What to do? Now we did a cytoplasmic tube. We did cytoplasmic MPO, cytoplasmic 22 and cytoplasmic CD3. Now CD3 is positive, though it's weak. Red. This is negative, but this is positive. All cells are 34 positive, these ones. And few of them express CD3. So CD3, cyto-CD3 was weakly positive. So it basically tells you are dealing with a T cell lymphoma, because cyto-CD3 is positive. So this is T cell blastic lymphoma. Now what is this? So on the whole, tumor cells express 7, 34, 3, 33, 56, some myeloid marker, stem cell marker. We did a lymphoma screening tube, and it was again 5 was negative, 4, 8 negative, 2 negative, 1A negative. So this is a new entity called as early T precursor ALL, which has been there for last only 5 years, 5 or 6 years. We never used to diagnose this. This is a type of T cell ALL, early T precursor ALL. They are from early precursor T cells from thymus. They are CD1A negative, they are 5 negative and 8 negative. Rest, they are very similar to ALLs. In addition, they express 1 or 2 myeloid markers, and they are 34 and 7 very strong. They were, we used to, when we look back, what we used to call these, we used to call them as stem cell leukemias or AMLs unclassifiable in the past, because cytoplasmic CD3 was weak. Sometimes we used to ignore that. So many of these cases in our lab, I have signed it out as AMLs unclassifiable or stem cell leukemias. But now this is a new entity called as early T precursor ALL. This is a very bad disease. I think this is Indian data. Thank you very much.
Questions?
You have any comments for Dr. Kane? Questions for Dr. Kane? If anybody has comments, I'll be happy. Yeah? Thank you.
So we go to the next talk. And now I'm not going to discuss any particular disease or theme. It is just to introduce you the concept of on-site cytology. You know, for there are 2 purposes. Can you project? Yeah. Role of on-site cytology in diagnosis of cancer. So there are 2 purposes for it. Is first and foremost is actually to tell you the adequacy or representative nature, and second one, whether you can offer a rapid diagnosis. Like it is upcoming field, very simple. So I wish you please be attentive, and all of you can follow in your clinic, whether it is private, institution-based practice or whatever. Wherever it is applicable, you should use. So this Dudgeon and Patrick in 1927 first described the use of imprint cytology over fresh tissues, essentially for rapid diagnosis of tumors, intraoperative diagnosis, as an alternative to frozen section, where you don't have frozen section facility. And I believe in even city of Mumbai, some people are using it for intraoperative diagnosis, imprint cytology. That is how it came into. Then imprint cytology is also used for lymph node biopsies. Just to quiz, previously when immunohistochemistry was not there, markers were used, special stains were done, even at Tata Hospital for, separating. Now it finds, it's quite funny nowadays with so many, you just saw 15 panel flow cytometer and all, but those were the days where this was used. Now it is extended to image-guided core biopsy. This imprint or squash, these are the 2 different types of cytologies. I'll come to that, it is later. And the success of this procedure depends largely on how adequate you get the tissue sample, which is again dependent on many factors. Skill of the operator is again important, but also the type of lesion size and type of the lesion and location of the mass, how deep-seated it is or how close or in proximity to important anatomical structures. Depending upon that, your tissue adequacy depends. So before I tell you, I go with one case, so that will give you the example. She was a 68 female, operated for right CA breast, treated at our hospital. Then within 1 year, she presented with left lung mass. On CT scan, it shows left lower lobe mass measuring 7 by 6 centimeter. So clinical diagnosis was single mass. It was clinical was query metastasis, query second primary, or it is the third any other benign lesion, or it is inflammatory lesion. So clinically they couldn't make up. So CT guided biopsy was done and on-site adequacy testing was done. So what were the questions when the CT guided biopsy was done? Is this biopsy material cellular? Is it diagnosis is possible? That means is it representative? Now is this lesion metastatic? If not metastatic, was it? Is it second primary? Is it inflammatory? And these were the cells which we got on the cytology. Now imprint cytology is just you touch and make. But here I'm talking about squash cytology. I will show you the pictures later. So even if I say imprint, it is essentially squash cytology. So this was a CT core biopsy of which squash cytology smear was made, and these were the cells. Obviously, it is not a metastatic carcinoma. It is not a granulomatous lesion. It doesn't appear as a second primary, that is carcinoma. So we called it benign spindle cell neoplasm because I thought these were benign. Though the nuclear hyperchromatic, all of us know that hyperchromatism is not synonymous with malignancies. Okay, the nuclei look bland, and this was the histology. It turned out to be a big solitary fibrous tumor, pleural base growing within the lung parenchyma. And there was so much relief on the part of patient as well as the clinicians that how come within 1 year you have got lung metastasis. This was IDC grade 3 with ERPR and CA of B2 positive. So this is how, in fact, in this particular case, we had given this diagnosis of benign spindle. We did not characterize, but we say it is definitely benign and it is a spindle cell, not at all a second primary. So here it not only told us that it is adequate, but we also gave a rapid diagnosis. So it serves the dual purpose of it. So why do we need on-site cytology on core needle biopsy? These are the mainly indications. You can do it for every core needle biopsy. Of course, you have so much resources, but it should be at least done in this particular area. Every pediatric patient, in adult patient, when it is deep-seated, critically seated mass close to the big vessels, from where repeat biopsy is difficult. Even the radiologist who is doing core needle biopsy day in and day out, they are little bit timid when it comes, when the deep mass is deep-seated and critically seated. Reluctant, particularly residents or maybe, less experienced people. Sometimes it has to be done for superficial masses where the first biopsy is non-diagnostic. They have done 1 or 2 biopsies, result of core biopsy I'm talking about is negative. Then the third time they are doing, you want to know whether it is representative or not. So that is the important aspect of this squash cytology. And rarely there are emergency conditions where urgent reports are needed. You want to know the report there and there only, wherein also you can give rapid diagnosis plainly on the cytology material. Actually, I had changed some of the slides and something happened and these have come up. Anyway, I will tell you whatever is important from your point. This is what is logistic in our hospital. All that I wanted to tell you is it is performed by the radiologist and on-site adequacy check is done by cytopathologist. But it can be done in residents in cytopathology. It can also be done in cytotechnologists. In our hospital, initially it was done by cytotechnologists, but they restricted themselves for adequacy testing. That means whether it is representative or not. When we started getting cytopathologists, we have trained them to offer diagnosis if possible. Every case it will not be, but as you can see, if it is a frank carcinoma case, you can there and there on cytology say it is carcinoma. Of course, biopsy is there. That report can always be seen later. The average, we do about 1 to 3 cases for on-site adequacy, whereas CT guided are much more, core biopsies are much more. The actual time and biopsy is site and operator dependent, but time for doing on-site adequacy is just 2 minutes, and the approximate cost of testing is ₹5. So again, you can see it is very time and cost effective. It can be done anywhere. Big center, small center, even rural area. So this is the basic requirement. Microscope, and this is for staining. That's it. So one table space, and this is the actual procedure. Okay, so this is that needle, true cut biopsy needle. You can see here the slots. The tissue is already taken. It is within the needle. Now tissue is displaced on the slide. And this is the biopsy core. This is how it looks. So only one biopsy is taken for your on-site adequacy. Then a squash smear is made. It is literally crushed and the smear is made. That is how you get the cellular material. And the material may not be so cellular, imprint. As you know, imprint cytology works where it is like round cell tumor, lymphoma. The cells come up very easily. Whereas for carcinomas and all, imprint may not work. So squash cytology works. Okay, this is the real technique of on-site adequacy done in the radiology, in the CT scan department. Here you can see the patient, gun biopsy tissue is removed, and here microscopic evaluation is done. So there and there only you can give the report of representativeness or adequacy as well. So this is the actual method. Image guided CNB is obtained by using quick core true cut biopsy needle. Okay. Already done, pathologist or cytotechnologist is there in the CT scan. Core is taken on the slide. It is crushed, a smear is made, immediately fixed with ether alcohol. This step is important for only 30 seconds. Stain with aqueous toluidine blue, 10 seconds. Mount with glycerin and your smears are ready for examination under microscope in 2 minutes. This is how the cytology smear looks. Toluidine blue stain, single stain, and you can easily make the diagnosis. Not only you can say it is representative, but you can also say that it is adenocarcinoma. Here it is little differentiated type, so it is very, monotonous looking, not much of pleomorphism, but you already have, I think the entire, this thing is changed, Kintan. Anyway, so we go to the results. So this is our age distribution. Now I come to our data, what we are routinely doing. So you can see that all the ages are included here. We also get pediatric patients, basically for round cell tumors, to say whether it is adequate or not. In pediatric, basically we say adequate. We don't try to classify on this imprint cytology. But in adult or carcinoma, you can really give diagnosis there and there only. So this one tells you the different sites, site distribution. Abdomen, pelvis, of course, is the most common site, followed by thorax and breast, and head and neck and extremities also we get, different lesions for. So this is, of course, a breakup of CT-guided biopsies, and we do cytology on that. Now this is our actually breakup of all those cases which we had done. You can see here the first column is that imprint cytology, that is squash cytology, was representative. Core biopsy followed representative. This happened in 26% cases. So it is concordance. But what is more important is second group. In the radiology department, the imprint was representative only after repeated pass. That means the first pass which I showed, the smear was made, was negative, then they repeated there. So second pass or the third pass came positive, and so core biopsy was representative. This happened in 61 or 62% cases. So what does that mean? That means if the squash cytology was not done in these cases, these all would have been non-representative. So see the difference. Only 26 would have been positive without cytology, whereas all these people would have waited till the biopsy is ready and the report would have gone as non-representative. That is the essence of its important slide. There was a third category which in both were non-representative. That means here first pass was negative, the repeat pass was negative, which happens sometimes. Radiologists are not just able to give you the right tissue. But there and there only they know. So they can go to the alternative. at the same time, they know that this is going to be non-representative. Rarely you have a discordance in the cyto and histo. That means we have cases where the cytology was representative, but core biopsy came negative. So again, we went back to the representative and the diagnosis was given and treatment was done. Whereas in some cases, it can be other way around, that core biopsy may be representative because they take more cores. Once you declare that this is representative, from the same site, more cores are taken for biopsy. So sometimes it can happen that this is negative. Just to show you some of the microphotographs, this was a case of a lung mass. The first was, these are the histology section. It was totally necrotic. It was repeated. Now this is with second pass. This is the cytology and this is the histology. You see, if you are like, if you are experienced, you have a CT, you have mediastinal nodes, you have pleural fluid, and you can give diagnosis of small cell, suggest diagnosis of small cell carcinoma even on cytology. So if the material is good again, the technique is good in a proper background, you can really hit the diagnosis, though biopsy report is always there to confirm. So this shows you the cyto-histo concordance, and we had a very good concordance in the imprint. So our sensitivity was 91, specificity 83, PPV 92, and NPV negative predictive value 86. So it is very good and a robust technique and very easy, as I have shown you already. Now this is the breakup of the diagnosis. Majority of them were carcinomas, majority of them adenocarcinoma. As you know, squamous carcinoma is more common head and neck, where there is no needle biopsy, so also in anogenital. But adenocarcinoma, majority were there. It also included, some of them were polydifferentiated carcinomas, some were neuroendocrine carcinomas. But as long as you tell carcinomas, the main purpose is over. Like, sarcomas were also there, where of course we said spindle cell. Some of them were also epithelioid looking sarcoma. In some we have been able to call it sarcoma on the squash cytology smear. But in some we may say just non-epithelial neoplasm. Hematolymphoid malignancies were 8. Round cell tumors, basically pediatric round cell 8. Germ cell tumors seen in mediastinum 2. Inflammatory or benign 36 or granulomatous 10. So, variety of lesions were included, and we could give justice to many of them. So what are the scope? The instant primary diagnosis can be given wherever necessary. Of course, it is very helpful to guide the further investigation, what you should do. See, like the case I showed you in case of IDC breast with lung mass. Once you say spindle neoplasm, no further requirement. The patient has to take up for surgery to remove the mass. But if it comes out something else, granulomas, you can collect material also for microbiological investigation. So that is also another additional use of it. It definitely avoids repeat biopsy by getting a representative material. And what does it translates into? If your biopsy is non-representative, that means it has to be repeated, and then again appointment has to be taken for CT guided, because it is again an imaging guidance procedure. So today you say negative, tomorrow it is not repeated. So that is the delay, then again it has to be processed for biopsy. So all this is avoided, so it is time, also money for patient, burden for the radiology, and also on pathology. So all this can be just avoided by doing on-site cytology. Besides, it is very cheap and simple and very easy. No hi-fi instruments required, no higher technical this thing. It's just amounts to a little bit training if you want cytotechnologists to do, and also for cytopathologists. On flip side, what are the limitations? You can get scanty material, but remember they can go in again. They change the site. If you get the first pass is negative, the radiologist, goes to the different site within the mass and again takes it. But still it can be scanty as it is operator dependent. Then sometimes the cells are there, but they are too crushed, so that is the technical problem. Rarely you have a interpretation problem. When there are atypical cells and you don't know they are reactive or neoplastic, but you can say representative. Sometimes there are spindly or epithelioid cells where you don't know whether it is carcinoma or it is sarcoma, because you can get epithelioid sarcoma, you can get sarcomatoid carcinoma. Here, of course, if it is in the recurrent setting, metastatic setting, if the primary diagnosis is made, it is easier. If the primary diagnosis is epithelioid sarcoma and now you have a recurrence, you can very easily say that it is a consistent with recurrence. So depends on what is the background. So what happens without on-site adequacy, clinician advise biopsy, image-assisted biopsy is done, sent for histopathologist, pathologist gives opinion. If it is diagnosis, it is end of the story. But if it is non-diagnostic, as I mentioned, the patient will go to the clinician. When he sees the report, he will order the repeat biopsy, then he will have to take the appointment, and then the cycle can go on and on if you do not do the on-site cytology. The repeat biopsy can also be negative, because once it was one resident, second time it was second resident, or maybe whatever. Second operator means again the same possibility is there. But on the other hand, if you do on-site cytology, then these other cycles are not necessary. You may get, often it is diagnostic, and with that, management can be offered. Sometimes, again, it will be non-diagnostic, but this cycle can be reduced short, and there only it can be repeated. So that is the advantage. Previously, it was another cycle. Here, it's the shorter one. You get inadequate, it is repeated. Most often, it becomes diagnostic for the second pass. So you can save the time also, and you can save the cost. Repeat CT, repeat biopsy means thousands, the cost runs in thousands. Here I showed 2 minutes and 5 rupees if you do not consider the cost of microscope. So we did study of this cost cytology, and it is published in Acta Cytologica, and these were our conclusions, that it is ideal and cost-effective technique in Ruzak of image-guided biopsies, rapid on-site adequacy check or test, which ensures adequacy, avoids repeat procedure, prevents delay in diagnosis, can be effectively performed even by trained cytologists. Now, this is not a new procedure. Abroad, it is being done regularly, but it is the cytopathologist on duty, because there are 10 cytopathologists as on faculty. So one person can be just, can focus on only image-guided by on-site adequacy in image-guided biopsy. We don't have that luxury, so you can, of course, you should have at least cytotechnologists to do that. But my idea was you can train anybody to do this adequacy testing. For giving diagnosis, naturally, you need a pathologist. So what is the message? It is a very simple, quick, cost-effective technique for rapid on-site testing, mainly applied to image-guided core biopsy, performed very efficiently by both pathologists and cytotechnologists, because as I've said before, we got cytotechnologists were routinely doing, we have analyzed it, and they have very good concordance for representative nature. Ensures adequacy, obviates the need for repeat biopsy and delay in diagnosis. Also very effective, this is what we are also stressing on, that the same can be used even for rapid diagnosis. If you are aware about different lesions, like for example, when you are doing mediastinal, you should know that in a young male, you can expect seminoma. We had even a teratoma in the mediastinum. So something which looks benign can be part of teratoma. So 1 or 2 glands in a little bit mesenchymal tissue around, you should suspect teratoma in the proper site, that is mediastinal. So overall, it reduces the cost of diagnosis, prevent delays, and it is very important in busy oncology centers, and I would say even in busy radiology centers. These days there are many private radiology clinics we are doing, very busily doing these core biopsies. So there also we can offer this help to, to get the representative material. So these are the references. This was the short presentation just to introduce the role of on-site cytology. And thank you very much for the listening.
Thank you, ma'am, for the wonderful lecture. And on behalf of the organizing committee for APPI, I would like to present madam with a memento. Thank you. Ma'am has introduced a very important area, ROSE as it is called, rapid on-site evaluation, and gone into the adequacy thing. So if there are any questions, yeah? Okay, there are lots of questions.
Madam, you have said that this is used for image guided biopsies. By any chance, the same procedure can be used during surgery to comment on involvement of surgical margins?
I don't think it can be used for margins, because on histology we know where exactly is the end or right margin, and we take, if it is a radial, we take tumor and margin, and few cells also maybe histologically we can pick up. But here it will be difficult, so it will not replace frozen section in that sense. But in frozen section, primary diagnosis you can use. Same tissue, you can crush and do cytology as well. We are doing cytology in frozen as a adjunct, as such, for all solid masses we are doing it. So primary diagnosis, it will be helpful, but not for the margins. Not that I know of, but that is taken care by radiologists. That is they are doing core biopsies. We are doing cytology, but I don't come across that only blood has come. Deep-seated, there may be some problems, of course.
How do you wash out that toluidine if you want to stain with any other thing?
You have to simply dip in the just water. Toluidine blue easily runs out. And then the same smear is used for pap stain. So when we actually give adequacy testing, it is on toluidine blue. But when we want to give a rapid report, actually, my presentation has changed. I had good, cases. See, once when I was doing this rapid on-site, they wanted an urgent report. This lady came only with this complaint of backache for 1 month. She didn't have any other complaint, or all her previous reports have been normal. So on imaging, they found osteolytic lesion in D8, single lesion. So they did cytology, and we could give report of it is metastatic carcinoma, most likely to be renal cell carcinoma. Now this report was given in the office after pap stain. We didn't give on toluidine blue. Toluidine blue, we said representative. They said, can you give a quick report? So we, did pap stain, and on that, and they said, but this patient doesn't have kidney mass. So I asked them to review the CT scan, and they did find a kidney mass, and then they operated. So with this cytology technique, within 4 hours, we gave report of metastatic renal cell carcinoma. But of course, every time it is, and they were really, pleased that we came with the idea that we have to do multiple investigation because it is just a backache and no other symptoms, no other signs, clinically also. And within 4 hours, they got the diagnosis. So it depends on, situation, how well the smear, adequacy and all that. So pap stain is necessary.
What is the ratio of ethyl alcohol and what alcohols can we use?
Ether alcohol,
1:1.
yeah, 1:1. Or,
Ethanol, methanol, anything can be
yeah, anything can be. Fixative. No, that core is only for cytology because it is squashed. So that is what I wanted to make it clear. That cannot be tested. Now then they go at the same. See, their main thing is there only. They take out the needle, give you the tissue, then again from the same area they remove more cores, and there is a correlation. So same type of lesion, lesional cells come. That tissue cannot. Yeah. But then this thing helps in which direction they should take. So if you are representative, same site they will take other cores, and those are for 5 cores for a routine histopath. If it is non-representative, they will change the direction, go at other place.
And the same smears which we use for screening, can we do it PAP also?
Yeah.
So as we're running short of time, we thought in the slide seminar we'll skip madams and my thing, and we'll have Dr. Amita Joshi madam come up for her thing. So that's another area which I know all of you are familiar with, ma'am, but she is in KEM Hospital and in the Metropolis Global Hospital, where there is a lot of endoscopic ultrasound FNACs happening. So she is going to, the way madam has introduced Rose, she'll be talking about EUS FNAC and showing us similar way how these little different things in FNACs are coming up and how they are so useful. So with that, I hand over the mic to ma'am.
Thank you, Kirti. Yeah, I thought I'll just share some interesting cases that we came across in USFNA. Can I have the next slide? What is he saying? Kirti is calling you, I think. Oh, okay.
This is to
Okay.
then this is to go ahead.
This one? Yeah. Okay. So this technique of USFNA has really revolutionized the practice of GI medicine and medicine in general, and it is becoming rapidly popular because now the clinicians are able to access the very deep-seated lesions. And although US was started almost in 1980, they had, oh, sorry. They just attached this probe to the endoscope, and somewhere in the last decade or so, they have attached this needle to take FNACs. So FNACs have become more popular in the last, say, about 10 years or so. But US was started somewhere in 1980. So now with those FNAs, we are receiving a lot of this cytology material, and just an extension of GI endoscope. Even endobronchial endoscope can access these mediastinal lymph nodes, etc., and we get a lot of these mediastinal lymph node biopsies as well. And as we all know, these pancreatic lesions are very difficult to access. With the US, we are able to access them easily, so we are receiving a lot of pancreatic FNACs, and like any other cytology material, they are difficult to differentiate between benign, malignant. The normal acinar cells are sometimes they are so subtly atypical that they look absolutely normal, and one may miss the well-differentiated adenocarcinomas, these PANINs, then IPMNs, mucinous cystic tumors. They are all difficult to diagnose. They are cystic in nature, and the cyst may not yield enough material in cytology. And again, they are difficult to differentiate from malignant lesions, etc. Inflammatory process, chronic pancreatitis versus well-differentiated adenocarcinomas is a usual problem that we face. So in short, for any cytology material, accuracy is absolutely proportional to the adequacy and representative of any biopsy material that we receive. Ideally, we have not been, so far we have not been able to impress upon our gastroenterologists that whatever material, tissue fragments, those little worms, blood clots that they send in cytology, they have to be cell blocked. They just smear on the slides and send to us, but these cell block preparations would be ideal for IHC staining, and they will definitely complement the cytology diagnosis, and IHC assessment can be done on them. And in these pancreatic FNACs, there are these contaminant duodenal gastric mucosa fragments come, sorry. And this is a duodenal fragment which is nice, beautiful duct epithelium, honeycomb-like material, but punctuated with lot of goblet cells, so that then we can separate it from the pancreatic duct epithelium. So with that, I'll just share a few cases. This was a 30-year-old man, came with a pain in abdomen, and he had a pancreatic body mass, and we received EUS-FNA. And this was the cytology material that we received. As you can see, these are very cellular aspirate, showing very subtle changes of pleomorphism, etc. They are disc cohesive cells and very subtle atypia, and background showed these inflammatory cells. So, but if you notice carefully, sorry, the cells did show some fine speckled chromatin. So we rendered a diagnosis of neuroendocrine tumor. And some tissue fragments were received in the same material which showed these fibrocapillary septa with some clinging cells which showed classical salt and pepper chromatine. So the diagnosis of NET was offered, and we received a distal pancreatectomy which showed this 2.5 centimeter well circumscribed mass in the pancreas. And classically it showed endocrine features. They were chromo, synapto, pan-CK positive, Ki was low, so we could offer a diagnosis of well-differentiated neuroendocrine tumor or grade 1 neuroendocrine tumor. This was a very classical history of 20-year-old boy came with spontaneous recurrent hypoglycemia, and there was an ill-defined lesion in the distal pancreas, body of pancreas. Although it was a very cellular, aspirate and not very classical of neuroendocrine lesion, subtle, but of course the cells were loosely clustered, loosely grouped, and they had finely granular cytoplasm, and the nuclei were eccentric, so, and they did have some stippled chromatin, so this was a classical, I mean this we called it compatible with neuroendocrine tumor, compatible with insulinoma, and distal pancreatectomy specimen did show a classical morphology of insulinoma or neuroendocrine tumor, and it stained strongly positive for insulin and low Ki index. So the diagnosis was not so difficult. So these neuroendocrine tumors, they have acinous formation. These low-grade neuroendocrine tumors may be mistaken for adenocarcinomas. There is a diagnostic problem with small cell carcinomas. These large cell neuroendocrine tumors may be confused with non-NET due to abundant cytoplasm and presence of prominent nucleoli. However, loose cell aggregates in the background of singly dispersed cells, feathery pattern created by tumor cells clinging to capillaries, rosette formation, delicate granular cytoplasm, inconspicuous nucleoli, molding in high-grade tumors, and most importantly, this speckled chromatin or salt and pepper chromatin are useful diagnostic features, cytological features of neuroendocrine tumors. This was a patient, a 45-year-old male. He came with epigastric pain and vomiting, and diagnosis was, clinical diagnosis was calcific pancreatitis. However, he had a very high CA 19.9. So clinically they knew that, that we are probably dealing with adenocarcinoma, and obvious features of adenocarcinoma are seen in this. In these smears. So I mean there is no big deal diagnosing these adenocarcinomas. All of us, I mean, are very, very familiar with this morphology. What is most important is these subtle signs of malignancy which we tend to miss, which we tend to call them as normal acinar cells, or we may interpret them as well-differentiated neuroendocrine tumors. So these are more important because today they are amenable, I mean they can be resected easily. These obviously malignant tumors, most often highly necrotic tumors, most often they are big and they are inoperable. So these, what is more important is to catch these well-differentiated lesions early. And this was the gross that we received, and it showed classical adenocarcinoma of pancreas. This case 4 had this 39-year-old man. He came with pancreatic head mass, and clinically they were considering intraductal papillary mucinous neoplasm of pancreas. So we received EUSFNA. It was a very cellular aspirate showing these duct epithelial cells, honeycombs of duct epithelial cells. Majority of them were quite regular. However, they did show subtle features of malignancy, and there was thick copious mucin in the background. Same thing, slight nuclear atypia and abundant copious mucin in the background. Some more smears showed these sheets of mildly atypical duct epithelial cells. They were loosely disc cohesive, and again mucin in the background. So we called it mucinous adenocarcinoma on cytology. And we received, fortunately, this patient was operated at our hospital, and we received pancreaticoduodenectomy specimen. It showed this 6 by 3.7 by 2 centimeter tumor in the head of pancreas, and it showed a classical morphology. It had these tall columnar cells with fibrous strands and abundant mucin, extracellular mucin with these tumor glands floating in them, like a colloid carcinoma. Typical morphology of colloid carcinoma we saw. And this tumor was CK positive, CK20 positive, CK7 negative. So these mucinous adenocarcinomas or colloid carcinomas is a rare variant of solid ductal carcinomas, where they have more than 50% of the tumor is mucinous, and it has a tall columnar cell morphology with abundant extracellular intracytoplasmic mucin. They have to be radiologically, they are difficult to differentiate from IPMN or mucinous cystic neoplasms. Signet ring cell morphology in pancreas location is exceptionally rare. This was a 42-year-old man. He was a chronic alcoholic, and we received a EUS FNAC of pancreatic cyst. And classically, it showed this degenerated material with inflammatory background. Sometimes one may see some fibroblasts, bile, etc. And we called it pseudocyst of pancreas. So these cystic lesions of pancreas, mainly they are IPMN, mucinous cystic neoplasms, serous cyst adenomas, solid papillary, pseudopapillary tumors or SPEN. They can be differentiated on radiology fairly well. So we need a perfect radiological correlation when we are interpreting cytology. On the fluid basis also, you can to some extent tell on a large, to a large extent. This thin watery fluidy material we see in serous cyst adenomas. Sometimes we see bloody aspirate in SPENs. And of course, cytology helps us. Cytology shows you branching papillae and with the clinging cells. And these cells, sometimes they get dispersed in the background, and these dispersed cells, they resemble well-differentiated adenocarcinoma cells. They resemble neuroendocrine tumors. So they have to be, but there are very subtle differences between them. If you don't get these papillae in these solid papillary tumors, then those cells have to be really identified correctly. This was a 33-year-old female patient. There was a cystic tumor in the head and body of pancreas, and we found this very poorly cellular aspirate. Very few of such clusters could be identified in the material. They were disc cohesive, bland, monolayered sheets of cells, and they were more or less uniform cells with round nuclei and variable amount of cytoplasm. I think it is very difficult to separate them from the duct epithelial honeycombs or the monolayer sheets that we receive from the duct epithelium. And so you need a perfect radiological correlation. And yes, our radiologist was of great help. This tumor was in the head of pancreas. It had that typical multicystic or honeycombed type of appearance, and with little calcification. So then we could render a diagnosis of serous cyst adenoma. These serous cyst adenomas classically show bland monolayered sheets, watery aspirate, and the cytoplasm is glycogen rich. So if one can do pass staining, I think we should reserve some of the smears for pass staining, and we can demonstrate that glycogen rich material in the cytoplasm. And these exfoliate is of monomorphic round cells with finely vacuolated cytoplasm, and it is mucin negative. They may resemble mesothelial cells or bland acinar cells on cytology, but of course radiology is of great help in that case. Then we have this 18-year-old female pancreatic mass in the body of pancreas, and there was no problem identifying this lesion. There are beautiful papillary structures with capillary cores in the center, fibrovascular cores with clinging tumor cells, and these tumors, and it's a very cellular aspirate, and these tumor cells have a very bland morphology and very fine chromatin. Some of them, many of them get exfoliated in the background. And these, if you find only these exfoliated cells, and if you don't get such papillary structures, then it becomes a problem to identify. So you have to look at the chromatin very carefully. So these solid papillary neoplasms show extremely cellular material. They show you branching papillary fronts. And in the background, we may have myxoid stroma, epithelioid cells. Sometimes these tumor cells may show longitudinal grooves, etc. And they may also show inconspicuous nucleoli. And sometimes PAS-positive myxoid stroma and Samoma bodies also can be seen in these tumors. DDs are obviously endocrine tumors, islet cell tumors, and papillary variant of duct carcinomas. This was a 30-year-old boy, a 30-year-old man came with backache since 2 years. USG and CT was interpreted as para-aortic lymph nodes, and it was FNA'd. It was a very cellular aspirate composed of single and loosely clustered cells with abundant pale cytoplasm with indistinct cell borders. High power view of these cells. Glassy kind of cytoplasm. Sometimes they may have a granular cytoplasm, and at places binucleate cells, some little pleomorphism, anisonucleosis, etc. could be appreciated. So we interpreted this as paraganglioma. And overall, this had uniform nuclei, so we gave the diagnosis of paraganglioma, pheochromocytoma, etc. However, sometimes these tumors can look like follicular neoplasm of thyroid. So lymph node metastasis of follicular carcinoma also should be kept in mind, although we did not offer this at that time. And renal cell carcinoma also should be kept in mind for such morphology. This patient, we received this aspirate 2 years back, and this patient continued to have a few attacks of backache, etc. in the last 2 years. Now the backache has become too severe, and during these backache attacks, he had some episodes of hypertension. Otherwise, his blood pressure was maintained normal. So his plasma metanephrine and non-metanephrine levels were performed, and his noradrenaline levels were very, very high, sky high during the episodes of backache. So he was operated, and just 2 days back we received this tumor, and frozen section showed a classical paraganglioma or pheochromocytoma like morphology. We haven't got the paraffins yet. So these paragangliomas are tumors, cytologically the tumor cells are single and loosely clustered, often forming curved rows or a vaguely follicular pattern, and that's why they resemble thyroid neoplasm. So that also has to be kept in mind. Background may be bloody. Abundant pale granular glassy cytoplasm with indistinct cell borders. Nuclei show you, they may be round to spindle shaped with speckled, evenly distributed chromatin like neuroendocrine tumors, and they stain positively for neuroendocrine markers. These are the features of pheochromocytomas or paragangliomas. Gastric GISTs are the mesenchymal tumors arising in the gastric wall, GIT walls. They are composed of fascicles of spindle cells with elongated cigar comma-shaped nuclei in a wispy filamentous background. This epithelioid, when you have this spindle cell morphology, they are not difficult to identify, but these epithelioid variants can pose a lot of difficulty in cytology preparations. The cells are round and they have, classically they show perinuclear halo, and the nuclei may be vesicular. This was a 80-year-old female. She came with loss of weight, bleeding per rectum, UGI scopy showed query gastric GIST. and we had largely, I mean, it was a very poorly cellular fragments, and it showed very vague oval cytoplasm, but nowhere that spindle cell morphology was obvious. Yet, so we call this epithelioid gist. And yes, we received a partial gastrectomy specimen which showed a submucosal tumor with a classical morphology. Somewhere they were spindle cells, somewhere they were, most of them were epithelioid cells. And they stained positively for CD117 dog1 SMA, negative for S100. So we called it benign GIST. Now malignant GISTs are sometimes difficult to diagnose on FNA, but yes, we can render a diagnosis of malignancy on these GISTs. Especially here you can see the spindle cell morphology, epithelioid morphology, hyper view of that spindle cell morphology. If you see background necrosis, if you see hyperchromatism, if you see mitosis, then it is that would point towards a malignant GIST. So these are the features of malignant GIST. And I've just shared some of the cases with you. I'm sure many of you are receiving EUS FNAs already, because we don't, lots of EUS is done in global hospital, but majority of it goes out. It doesn't, the whole thing doesn't come to us. So I'm sure many of you are receiving the rest. Thank you.
Interesting to know, how do you get this material, whether it's liquid-based cytology, whether it's biopsy, how do you receive this material?
They smear we receive the smears, yeah. We receive the smears from them.
And what about adequacy? When do you report the adequacy?
Yeah, they don't send us any samples for adequacy. We, yeah.
It has to be repeated. How many days?
Yes, yeah, they repeat after we send them the report. We have got so far. Fortunately, our gastroenterologists are really good. They are able to give adequate material. But yes, 2-3 occasions they have repeated the procedure, and because I think they are new, for some of the patients they repeat it at much low cost or free. Yeah.
There is not so many people, they want a cytopathologist coming all the time, but because of the ratio in India is not like that. So yes, ideal would be rapid onset reanimation. That would be the ideal scenario.
Yeah.
And we try to do it as much as possible, at least with the cytotechnologist, if not with the cytopathologist. And it comes, as you said, like a conventional smear, but there is an option of doing LBC at that time also. So some of them do like to do it. It depends really also on the two people, the clinician and the pathologist involved. Any other questions?
I just wanted to have some comment if there are no questions. Beautiful, she has shown you all the spectrum of lesion. Just 2 comments from the experience. Paraganglioma may be oncocytic cells. That's why they were, oncocytic may be variant. That's why they were large, granular. Of course, you know this for audience. So you have maybe in oncocytic form, paraganglioma is better diagnosed. But when they are non-oncocytic, it's really a difficult diagnosis. And if you don't see that the vessel and clinging, and it's a good that she showed, because it is usually diagnosed as then carcinomas, because they always show pleomorphism, and the nuclei, the speckle chromatin, if you do not appreciate, sometimes you can see holes also. So you know, it's experience is needed for all those, otherwise you can mistake one for other. And second point, which I didn't show you in my case, when you have a problem, whether it is sarcoma and carcinoma, you look for the collagenous stroma. The solitary fibrous tumor, the initial my diagnosis was spindle carcinoid, because SFT, you know, is very rare tumor as such. So to diagnose on cytology, if you see the chromatin, I didn't have a time and I didn't tell you. The first diagnosis on that lung mass on-site cytology was carcinoid, but then we studied and there were differences. But what was important was that collagenous stroma, which, you know, helped me to make a diagnosis of spindle cell neoplasm. So whenever you have a epithelioid tumors and you are thinking in terms of a sarcoma, please look for a stroma around, either collagenous or a myxoid, which usually will not be seen in cytology in carcinoma.
So with that, I think we'll end. Everybody must be hypoglycemic also. So I'd just like to, on behalf of the APPI organizing committee, just thank all of you all for being such good patient listeners and active participants with the number of queries that came in. So it was a pleasure giving these talks. And of course, would like to thank the entire faculty, Kane Madam, Dr. Bharat, Amita ma'am, for, giving us such a lovely potpourri of, I think we covered everything from gynac, conventional, LBC, ancillary, and in FNAC, your conventional and EUS, roles. So I think it was I don't know whether you all felt that it was a good coverage of Cyto and PAP. So, and if there's anything else, of course, you can discuss over lunch. So all your certificates are here. You can please give your feedback forms and collect your certificates with me.